the series of innumerable attacks that Stalin and Stalinists have carried out against the co-leader of the Russian Revolution alongside Lenin, Leon Trotsky, and his theory of permanent revolution, upon which was based the October Socialist Revolution in Russia. A new video titled Why I'm Not a Trotskyist is introduced by Professor Taimur Rahman of Pakistan, who is General Secretary of Mazdoor Kisan Party there, spokesperson for Lal Band, and a professor of political science in Pakistan. In this video, Professor Taimur Rahman has made certain claims against Trotsky. In fact, he has repeated by rote the very same allegations that had been made by Stalin and Stalinists against Trotsky for a century over. While making these allegations, we would show that Professor Taimur Rahman has gone even a step further than Stalin and other Stalinists. In response to this video, where several accusations had been made against Trotsky, we are putting out a series of videos dealing with each one of accusation separately. In the last video, we had shown this video is so palpably evident of the political bankruptcy of Stalinists that any comment on this video was in fact out of place. But because we see that these Stalinist leaders are deliberately sowing confusions among the new generations that are not so well entrenched in the socialist history and the history of different revolutions. So we deemed it necessary to respond to this video and take up these allegations in different videos one by one in a series. In the last video, we had exposed how Taimur Rahman's allegation against Trotsky, that Trotsky was opposed to socialist revolution in one country, is totally baseless, is false to the core, and that it was Leon Trotsky who was the first proponent of the Russian proletariat. The proletariat in one country would come to power, would take power through a socialist revolution. So in that video, we had demolished the arguments of Stalinists and have come up with correct position of Leon Trotsky on the question of socialist revolution in one country. Now in this video, we are refuting the allegation made by Professor Taimur Rahman against Trotsky that Trotsky had termed peasantry as a reactionary force, and his simultaneous assertion that Lenin had termed peasantry as a revolutionary force. So his combined allegation that Trotsky had termed peasantry as a reactionary force while Lenin had termed it as a revolutionary force, we are dealing in this video. Now, first of all, we must place it on record that it is absolutely false that Trotsky or Lenin or Marx even have ever given an inherent abstract character to peasantry, revolutionary or reactionary. None of the Marxist leaders has given an abstract inherent character to peasantry. In fact, both Lenin and Trotsky are in complete agreement with each other that peasantry has a dual and contradictory character that would come up in different revolutions differently. In fact, neither Trotsky assigns a reactionary nor Lenin an abstract revolutionary character to peasantry. Both of them fully agree that peasantry retains a contingent, dual and contradictory character that would come up differently in different revolutions. In making this claim that Leon Trotsky had imputed a reactionary character upon the peasantry, Taimur Rahman has gone a step further than Stalin and Stalinists. Let us listen to Stalin first, what he says. Accusing Trotsky of forgetting the peasantry, Stalin wrote. Let me read it. Trotsky in 1905 simply forgot all about the peasantry as a revolutionary force and advanced the slogan of no Tsar but a workers' government. That is the slogan of a revolution without the peasantry. This was Stalin. Stalin says that Trotsky has forgotten in his formulation about the peasantry. But the fact is that this formulation is not of Trotsky. The formulation, not the Tsar, but the workers' government, is not the formulation of Leon Trotsky. It was formulation of Alexander Hafland, powers of Germany. What was Trotsky's slogan? Trotsky's slogan, a slogan clearly embracing the peasants alongside workers, and the Russian Revolution was not the Tsar, not even Zemsty, the liberals, but the people. And people included, alongside workers, the peasants. In fact, the peasantry was the people. It was the majority. So it is absolutely false to accuse Trotsky of ignoring the peasantry. In his formulation, peasantry is there. Stalin, the crooked, had deliberately done this forgery. He had imported the definition of parvas and imputed it upon Trotsky. Trotsky had never said, not a Tsar but a workers' government. Trotsky said, neither Tsar nor Zemsty but people. That means against the Tsar and liberals, against the monarchy and bourgeoisie, workers and peasants. Isn't Lenin's formula the same? Very same. It is Lenin's formula also. Against Tsar and capitalists, the combination of workers and peasants. So Lenin and Trotsky fully agree on it. But Stalin and behind him his disciples, they continue agitating the same discredited allegation which Trotsky and we Trotskyists have again and again replied to. Again and again we have clarified on that. We answered it. But they would not listen. They would continue to repeat it by rote. And this formulation of Trotsky is not a later fabrication. But it was once again published and his collected works immediately after the October Revolution in Lenin's lifetime. So it is very clear that Trotsky's formula included the peasantry. The allegation of Stalin was absolutely false. It was a forgery, it was a fabrication. It was a lie, blatant lie. But unconcerned with it, Stalins go on and on making the very same allegation which was discredited in the last century itself. They are repeating it by rote just to confuse the generations. After a century, now Stalinists are not only repeating it but are taking a step further. as Taimur Rahman does. Taimur Rahman not only accuses Trotsky of ignoring the peasantry, he makes an outright false allegation against Trotsky that Trotsky assigns a reactionary character and role to peasantry, while he says Lenin assigns a revolutionary role. A reactionary role for peasantry in the Russian Revolution meant that peasantry was opposing the revolution. If peasantry was opposing the revolution, why Trotsky was putting it in the combination with worker? In line with Lenin, Trotsky accepts the political equation for Russian Revolution against monarchy and capitalists, the combination of workers and peasants, the people. This is the equation that both Lenin and Trotsky are in full agreement upon, and both of them agree that this is a fundamental equation of Russian Revolution. Now, the whole confusion that Stalinists like Professor Taimur Rahman have created around the question of peasantry is rooted in their allegation that Leon Trotsky had opposed Lenin's idea, Lenin's proposition of democratic dictatorship of the proletariat and peasantry. Now let us see first whether Leon Trotsky was opposed to Lenin's proposition of democratic dictatorship of proletariat and peasantry. They cannot produce even a single evidence that Trotsky was opposing this proposition. The fact is that Lenin and Trotsky both had agreed on this proposition of Lenin. This formula of Lenin constituted the basic premise for the program of revolution to which Trotsky had agreed. What Trotsky said about this democratic dictatorship of proletariat and peasantry, Trotsky said that Lenin's proposition is absolutely true, albeit it's an algebraic formulation. He said that I had only supplied an arithmetical value to it. Now, how Trotsky supplied an arithmetical value to it? Trotsky raised a question that it is absolutely correct that the Russian Revolution would get materialized as a regime, as a combined regime under the domination of working class and the peasantry. It would be led by and it would be dominated by the combination of two classes. But he raised a question. He asked to himself, he put it to himself, how these two classes would be facing each other. What would be the interrelationship inside this combined regime of worker and peasant? And to this, he answered that this democratic dictatorship of proletariat and peasantry would be a dictatorship of the working class followed by peasantry. In fact, it is in this formula, it is in this interpretation that October Revolution was materialized. In October 1917, the power that had sprung up from the socialist revolution, that was dictatorship of the proletariat supported by peasantry. But the Stalinists and their cohorts, Maoists, posed this democratic dictatorship against the socialist dictatorship and divide the revolution artificially in two stages. In fact, they impart a democratic character to February and a socialist character to October. And they counterpose them to each other. They look at February as realization of Lenin's formula of democratic dictatorship of proletariat and the peasantry. But we ask them, has Lenin ever said that February had materialized his democratic dictatorship? Had he supported the February government for realizing this democratic dictatorship? No. Lenin had clearly said that this February government is not the government of democratic dictatorship. So February was a failure. February had failed to bring up the power, the dictatorship, the democratic dictatorship of proletariat and peasantry. In fact, this democratic dictatorship was realized in October. October itself was the democratic dictatorship and socialist dictatorship both. It was a socialist dictatorship of the proletariat supported by peasantry, and in that sense, it was democratic dictatorship. So the two dictatorships were the flip sides of the same coin. This is what Stalinists refuse to recognize. They look at February as a democratic dictatorship that goes against Lenin. That is something which Stalin was arguing. That is something which most of the Bolsheviks thought before Lenin had arrived in Russia. And this was the main dispute between Lenin and these Bolsheviks, all the Bolshevik leaders. Lenin never thought that February was democratic or his democratic dictatorship was realized in February. Lenin was opposing this idea. This idea, in fact, would give a revolutionary character to the provisional government that was established in February and which Lenin was opposing. Lenin was staunchly opposed to. It was Lenin who called for its reversal, for its overturn. Now the question is, wasn't Trotsky's characterization of peasantry in line with Lenin and Marx? One can see very clear, as Taimur Rahman has cited Marx himself on the question of character and role of peasantry in the French Revolution of 1871. He has cited Marx, where Marx says that peasantry has played a reactionary role. So peasantry has this dual role, and all Marxists from Marx to Lenin to Rosa and Trotsky, they have understood the peasantry not as a homogeneous social class, but as a heterogeneous mass of different social layers that had contradictory character. And there was no abstract inherent character ever imparted to peasantry by any of the Marxist leaders. All were of the opinion that the character and role of the peasantry at a given moment would be determined by its position of its different layers and sections to different social classes existing at the time, standing in favor of reaction or revolution. They all were of the opinion that at all crucial junctures of history of the crisis, that included mainly war and revolutions, peasantry would get split under this hammer of crisis. Its lower sections, its poor sections would go over to revolution and its richer upper sections would go over to reaction. Isn't that what had happened in Russia after the first strikes of the hammer of revolution in February? Yes, exactly this has happened. When the Party of Socialist Revolutionaries, the largest peasant party in Russia, was split in two under the strike of this hammer of February Revolution, of the crisis of Tsarism. The right socialist revolutionaries had gone over to the cadets, the provisional government, towards capitalism, while its poorer sections, led by left SRs, the left socialist revolutionaries, had taken the side of Bolsheviks, the side of revolution. And they followed the Bolsheviks to socialist revolution. So the character of the peasantry would be determined by the role of its different sections at the given conjuncture of events at different stages of the history. Now, the allegation against Trotsky that Trotsky had ignored the peasantry or had said that peasantry would play a reactionary role is absolutely false. In Russian Revolution, Trotsky had, in fact, again and again said that peasantry may play a decisive role. Trotsky has given very big role to peasantry. Trotsky said that it may play a decisive role in the Russian Revolution. What Trotsky said, peasantry can't do, and peasantry can't assume, that is an independent and leading role. This was the assertion of Trotsky that peasantry cannot have an independent or leading role, but it can have decisive role as a force capable to carry out a revolution, but as an ancillary force behind the working class, not as an independent, not as a leading force of the revolution. Trotsky emphasized, like Lenin, that it is the working class that would be the leading and independent force. To play the part of an independent force, peasantry had to be independent from both basic classes, worker and bourgeoisie. That peasantry was not capable of. So peasantry has to follow one of them, either bourgeoisie or the worker, and in the peasant agrarian countries where peasantry is the dominating mass of the population, its majority, its role would become decisive. If it would go behind bourgeoisie, the bourgeoisie would win and bourgeoisie would come to power and would remain in power. But if it goes behind the worker, it would catapult the working class to power. Peasantry would not have an independent or leading role, but the peasant wars, the agrarian wars, the agrarian question would play a very important role. Second edition of these peasant wars would catapult the working class to power, to the dictatorship. Who imparted an inherently abstract character to peasantry? In the Russian Revolution, it was Narodniks, and after them the SRs, the socialist revolutionaries, who had imparted the peasantry an abstract revolutionary character, an inherent character. It was Narodniks who had eulogized peasantry, who argued that peasantry is having an inherently revolutionary character. The Stalinists, following the Nerudniks and socialist revolutionaries, are fantasizing about this sort of revolutionary character in peasantry. In fact, they are inherently Nerudniks. Stalinists and Maoists are the nationalist Nerudniks who have this sort of illusions about peasantry that were previously entertained by Nerudniks. We should not forget that Nerudniks were anti-Marxists who had turned their backs upon the proletariat and the revolution, the socialist revolution. It was the Nerudniks who used to accuse Lenin and the Bolsheviks of ignoring the peasantry. Let me read from Trotsky's Proletariat and the Peasant War in China, a letter to the Chinese Bolshevik Leninists. The Russian Nerudniki betimes accused the Russian Marxists of ignoring the peasantry, of not carrying on work in the villages, etc. To this, the Marxists replied, "We will arouse and organize the advanced workers, and through the workers we shall organize the peasants. Such in general is the only conceivable road for the proletarian party." Here Trotsky agrees with the stance of Bolsheviks. He cites the answer Bolsheviks were giving to Nerudniks. And the answer was to their accusation that we will organize the working class first, and through working class we would approach the peasant. Through the city we will approach the village. This was the stance of Bolsheviks. And Trotsky is in complete agreement with that. Showing his agreement with this, Trotsky is citing the accusation of Nerudniks and the reply of Bolsheviks to it. So it is completely idiotic to say that Trotsky is giving a different response to the question, to the peasant question in Russian Revolution than Bolsheviks. Present day Stalinists, rather the Stalinists for over the century, have repeated this Nerudnik allegation against Bolsheviks by rote against Trotsky. They are repeating the very same allegation that one time Nerudniks used to make against Bolsheviks. Now Stalinists are making against Trotsky. That Trotsky had turned his back upon the peasantry, or Trotsky was terming the peasantry as reactionary. Both allegations are wrong. Neither Trotsky is ignoring the peasantry, nor Trotsky is giving an abstract inherent character to peasantry, either revolutionary or reactionary. And that is in complete agreement with Lenin, Marx, Engels, Rosa. All Marxists are in agreement on that. Whether Bolsheviks had the fixed goalposts in relation to peasantry. Now this is absolutely untrue. They had no fixed goalposts. We would see that Bolsheviks had started from demanding plots of lands for peasantry. They were in favor of giving land to the peasantry. Then they turned to nationalization of the whole land. They took a sharp turn. Then from nationalization, the demand for nationalization, they adopted the program of socialist revolutionaries. That was not nationalization. That was against nationalization. And then they took another sharp turn once again towards nationalization, to a collectivization. So there was no fixed goalpost. They kept on shifting this goalpost time to time. This is what must be understood in relation to Russian Revolution, that the policy of Bolsheviks towards the peasantry was not a rigid policy. They were accommodating to the situations, at different situations, addressing different expectations also, and it all depended how the sections of peasantry stood in relation to the revolution at the given point of time. Bolsheviks were not opportunists, Lenin and Leninists were not opportunists, that they were shifting their goalposts. These goalposts were being shifted because of the animating relationship between the working class and peasantry on the one hand, and peasantry and the landlords, bourgeoisie on the other hand. Despite all these efforts, did the Bolsheviks succeed in mobilizing the peasantry behind them? The answer is a big no. Despite everything, Bolsheviks had failed to mobilize the peasantry directly. Peasantry was mobilized behind socialist revolutionaries. SR party was the biggest party of peasantry, and Bolsheviks in fact failed to muster even small support among the peasantry. Bolsheviks had to make an alliance with the lad. SRs dominated the peasantry, and it was because of this domination of SRs among the peasantry that the Constituent Assembly elections were lost by Bolshevik party. Even after October Revolution, and despite the fact that the real power was in the hands of the Soviets or the Bolsheviks, who were dominant force inside the Soviets, in the Constituent Assembly elections, Bolsheviks lost, and SRs had come in majority inside the Constituent Assembly. And for this reason, Constituent Assembly had to be disbanded by force by the Bolshevik government. To assert their dictatorship, Bolsheviks, the representatives of the working class, had to disband the Constituent Assembly that was reflecting the domination of peasantry, the domination of SRs. So the dictatorship of the working class was asserted through arms against the Constituent Assembly, against the peasantry. The dictatorship of the revolution against the reaction. This is how October Revolution had resolved the question of relationship between working class and the peasantry. Allegation on peasant question that Professor Rahman has made against Trotsky is that Leon Trotsky had relied more upon the European worker instead of the Russian music, the Russian peasant. This allegation is absolutely true against Trotsky. But this allegation itself shows proletarian internationalist character of Leon Trotsky. And in contraposition to it, the nationalist Narodnik character of Professor Rahman himself and all other accusers of Trotsky on this count. It was not only Trotsky, but Lenin too, who had relied upon the European worker instead of the Russian peasant. Reliance upon Russian peasant of Bolsheviks was not the bright side of the revolution, rather its darker side. This reliance was temporary in nature, only intermittent, till the time the proletariat takes power in the West, inside Europe. Once the proletariat would have taken power inside Europe and would have come to the aid of the proletariat dictatorship in Russia, this reliance upon peasantry would have ended, would have come to an end. And Lenin was the most desperate leader for this, for ending this reliance upon the Russian peasant, for giving a socialist push to the revolution. It was Lenin who was most desperate to enter the Europe for armed interventions inside Europe. Soviet-Polish War is the most evident example of it, where Lenin was seeking one or the other pretext and the ways and means to enter the Europe. So the reliance upon European worker, and for that matter the working class of the world, was the basic postulate of Bolshevism, of Leninism. And Trotsky is not guilty of any sin when he places such reliance upon the European worker. But it is the brightest side of Trotskyism, his proletarian internationalism, that needs real applaud for Leon Trotsky. In direct opposition to it, we find Professor Rahman sticking to his Narodnik nationalist stance, being a Pakistani. He would prefer to rely upon the peasantry of Pakistan more than the worker of India. That is highly deprecable from a revolutionary Marxist point of view. Lenin had made it clear on several occasions, like before the Brest-Litovsk Treaty was signed. Lenin said that had the German Revolution been coming, I would have been the first person to be ready to sacrifice the Russian Revolution for the sake of German Revolution. So Lenin is not nationalist. He is ready to sacrifice the Russian Revolution for the sake of German Revolution, because he knows that the German worker, the worker of an advanced country, advanced capitalist country, would be more capable to carry out the tasks of world socialist revolution as compared to the Russian worker. So he puts the revolution in Russia at a lower pedestal than the revolution in Germany. He gives more significance to socialist revolution in Germany. This is internationalism of Lenin. This is internationalism of Leon Trotsky. Both Lenin and Trotsky had considered the reliance upon the Russian peasant of the Bolshevik Revolution as a baggage that was imposed by historic conditions. And both of them, in fact, wanted to get rid of this baggage as soon as possible. Through revolutions in Western Europe, or even through direct armed intervention, as I said, that Soviet-Polish War was a live example of it. In fact, the reliance upon Russian peasantry by the workers' government, the Bolshevik government in Russia, was imposed upon it by the historic conditions that included primarily the backwardness of Russia as an agrarian peasant country, and the failures of socialist revolutions in the West that forced Russia and the October Revolution to isolation. Professor Rahman eulogizes this alliance, this reliance upon the peasantry, and views a revolution in India or Pakistan also as a nationalist revolution where he wants the Pakistani and Indian working class to rely upon its peasantry instead of relying upon each other. Rahman himself quotes Marx in relation to 1871 peasantry in France, that peasantry had played a reactionary role. But even then, he doesn't understand the dual and contradictory character of peasantry. He continues his rhetoric that Trotsky was accusing peasantry of being reactionary. Like Marx, Lenin, Engels, Rosa, Trotsky has also underlined this dual and contradictory character of peasant and has examined the character of peasantry in accordance with the role revolutionary or reactionary its sections have played at different stages of the revolution in different countries at different times. So neither Trotsky has imparted an abstract inherent role to the peasantry nor any other Marxist has done that. Only Narodniks had eulogized peasantry. They have imparted an inherent abstract character to the peasantry, a revolutionary character, and like Narodniks, on the line of Narodniks, their Stalinist cousins, and after them the Maoists, they are assigning the same character and role to the peasantry, a revolutionary role, abstract role, inherently a revolutionary role that is historically and politically incorrect. Marxists have examined the role of peasantry not in its inherent character, but in its precise positions towards the revolution and reaction at the given juncture of history, and towards the social classes, the basic social classes that are fighting for their rule. Despite their efforts, Bolsheviks had failed to mobilize peasantry behind them in Russian Revolution. As we told, they had to disband the Constituent Assembly, and first right SRs opposed the Bolsheviks, the revolution, the Bolshevik government thereafter, and thereafter left SRs, the left socialist revolutionaries, had also abandoned this government one by one. So this is self-evident that as socialist measures would be taken, the workers' government would advance on the socialist path against the private property, against the bourgeoisie. More and more sections of peasantry would drift away from the government and from the revolution. Lenin himself was in favor of a dictatorship of the proletariat, followed by peasantry, and wanted to tie the peasantry behind this dictatorship, wanted to subordinate the peasantry to the dictatorship of the working class. Let me quote from his April thesis. Proposing a plan for advance to a socialist revolution, Lenin had read this thesis in the assemblies of Bolsheviks and then Bolsheviks and Mensheviks both. The weight of emphasis in the agrarian program to be shifted to the Soviets of agricultural laborers' deputies. This is so amply clear. Lenin is proposing to shift the entire weight of preparations towards the Soviets of laborers' deputies, the Soviets of agricultural workers. He says the main focus of preparation for revolution must be the Soviets of agriculture workers inside the villages. This was his agrarian program for the coming revolution. Then he says the organization of separate Soviets of deputies of poor peasants. So he wants to extract the lower layer of peasantry from the upper layers at the eve of the revolution. He proposes that poor peasants be organized into separate Soviets than the medium and rich peasants. The setting up of a model farm on each of the large estates under the control of the Soviets of agriculture liberal deputies. Then again he says that on all the landed estates there must be full control of laborers' deputies. Here he excludes the poor peasantry also. He wants to put the big landed estates directly under the control of agriculture working class. This is from the April thesis, which he titled as the tasks of the proletariat in the present situation. So he's emphasizing the tasks of the proletariat. Proletariat only, not the peasantry here. This is what he is underscoring. After the uprising of 1905, revising the RSTLP program and its agrarian section, Lenin wrote, "The party should in all eventualities and whatever the situation, with regard to democratic agrarian reforms, consider it as its task to steadfastly strive for the independent class organization of the rural proletariat." So, deriving essential lessons from the 1905 uprising, Lenin was emphasizing the organization of rural proletariat at the center of the revolution, together with the peasant proprietors against the landlords and the landlord state, together with the urban proletariat against the entire bourgeoisie and all the peasant proprietors. Such is the slogan of the class-conscious rural proletariat. So here, Lenin is again putting the rural proletariat at the center of the agrarian revolution, not the peasantry. He is advocating an alliance with peasantry but for limited purpose. In fact, he is again underscoring the dual and contradictory character of the peasantry. So while combining the two slogans, in one he goes with the peasantry, in the other he goes against the peasantry. This dual character of peasantry is very important. This is what exactly Leon Trotsky is saying. Lenin clarifies it further. We have seen that in the modern Russian village, two kinds of class antagonism exist side by side. First, the antagonism between the agriculture workers and the proprietors, and secondly, the antagonism between the peasantry as a whole and the landlord class as a whole. So Lenin clarifies it further, and not in 1917, but in 1901, writing for Iskra. The Workers' Party and the Peasantry. Clarifying the attitude of the Workers' Party towards the peasantry, Lenin says that while fighting the nobility, fighting the monarchy, we have to take the peasantry alongside us. But we are not to forget our socialist fight that goes against all proprietors, urban and rural. So Lenin is not giving any abstract inherent character to peasantry as a revolutionary force. He is talking of dual role of peasantry. In one formula, in one equation, peasantry is ally of the working class. In the other, It stands against the working class, it is hostile to it. In the same article, Lenin writes, we should be making a mistake if we defended measures that would have the effect of retarding social development or of artificially shielding the small peasantry amidst the growth of capitalism against the development of large-scale production. So here Lenin makes it more clear. He says that we don't support peasantry, the small landholding. We don't stand in defense of the small landholding or the small peasant as against the development of large-scale capitalism. That means the small landholding and the landholder peasant is reactionary insofar as the development of capitalism is concerned. It has a revolutionary role only in relation to the feudal land ownership, the medieval land ownership, not in relation to bourgeois property, the bourgeois social relationship. So Lenin is ascribing a dual role to peasantry, a contradictory role to peasantry, a reactionary and a revolutionary role to peasantry, a contingent role to peasantry. This is how Trotsky also defines it. But our Stalinists are not following, in fact, Lenin. They are following Narodniks, the SRs. In fact, they themselves are Narodniks. They themselves are socialist revolutionaries, petty bourgeois revolutionaries. Lenin continues, our party must include such demands in its program if it is to take the lead of the whole people in the struggle against the autocracy. But the inclusion of these points does not mean that we would call active revolutionary forces from the towns to the villages. Such a thing is out of the question. And this is very important. Lenin says we are not advocating that our cadres should go to the village. Rather, they should stick to the city. They must take over the city. They must prepare the revolution in the city. They must prepare the working class. Working class is the class of Marxists. And they must take the leadership of the peasant mass through mobilization of the working class. So this is the relationship between Marxists and the working class on the one hand and the working class and the peasantry on the other, that Lenin and Trotsky both are completely in agreement upon. It is absolutely incorrect to accuse Trotsky of ignoring the peasantry or opposing the peasantry. We would cite from history of the Russian Revolution itself, the seminal work of Leon Trotsky, where Leon Trotsky says the subsoil of the Russian Revolution was the agrarian question. And that's the nub. Leon Trotsky says that the main content of Russian Revolution is the revolution of the village, the agrarian revolution. That means peasant is in the focus as the main force of the revolution. The social relationship. Where peasant is the chief actor, is at the center of the revolution in Russia. Let us go back to his results and prospects, where he is for the first time published his theory of permanent revolution. The struggle for the emancipation of Russia from the incubus of absolutism, which is stifling it, has become converted into a single combat between absolutism and the industrial proletariat. A single combat in which the peasants may render considerable support but cannot play an independent or a leading role. Now, this is very important. Here, Leon Trotsky clarifies himself fully. He gives a very important role to the peasantry. But alongside, he says that this role would neither be independent nor the leading. And this is the core aspect of the theory of permanent revolution as advanced by Leon Trotsky, which Stalinists want to suppress. While quoting this from Trotsky, they often deliberately omit the last line where Trotsky is saying that peasantry would be having very important role. Let me repeat it. He says a single combat in which the peasants may render considerable support. In his History of Russian Revolution, Trotsky says further, the Russian proletariat found its revolutionary audacity not only in itself. Its very position as minority of the nation suggests that it could not have given its struggle a sufficient scope, certainly not enough to take its place at the head of the state. If it had not found a mighty support in the thick of the people, such a support was guaranteed to it by the agrarian problem. So Trotsky puts it with all necessary clarity that without the support of the peasant, the working class couldn't have come into power. So he gives a decisive role to the peasantry for catapulting the working class to power. He is not ignoring the peasantry and he is not giving a reactionary character to the peasantry here. Rather, he is giving a revolutionary role to the peasantry in Russian Revolution. He is underscoring that revolutionary role. He is saying that the revolution succeeded because of peasantry, because of the role of the peasantry, revolutionary role of the peasantry. Working class could come to power only because the force of the rebellious peasantry of Russia. In his article, Proletariat and Peasant War in China, now highlighting the inner mechanics of peasant war in China, Leon Trotsky says, the peasant movement is a mighty revolutionary factor in so far as it is directed against the large farm owners, militarists, serfdom and usurers. But in the peasant movement itself are very powerful proprietary and reactionary tendencies, and on a given stage it can become hostile to the workers and sustain the hostility already equipped with arms. He who forgets about the dual nature of the peasantry is not a Marxist. The advanced workers must be taught to distinguish from among communist signs and banners the actual social processes. So he wants that behind a red banner, a communist banner, this differentiation between proletariat and peasantry should not be hidden. The communist cadres must be taught, must be educated to understand this differentiation between working class and the peasantry. Here Leon Trotsky emphasizes, like Lenin, this dual character of peasantry, where peasantry at one time would support the working class to eliminate landlordism, to attack the landlordism and to liberate it from the clutches of medievalism. But at the other point, peasantry would oppose it. It may be a hostile opposition too to the working class regime. Cautioning the working class and the communist cadres in China, Leon Trotsky writes in the same article, Proletariat and Peasant War in China. He says the operation of the Red Armies must be attentively followed and the workers must be explained systematically the direction, the significance, and the perspectives of the peasant war. And the current demands and the tasks of the proletariat must be tied up with the slogans for the liberation of the peasantry. So he says that yes, the demands of the proletariat must be tied up with the peasantry. Proletariat must raise the demands in favor of the peasantry. But he wants that the operations of Red Army must be followed with caution because of the dual character of the peasantry. And it was demonstrated in the Chinese Revolution when in 1949 the victorious armies entering into Peking had fired upon the striking workers. So this dual character of the peasantry that Lenin underscores again and again has to be understood. And instead of accusing Trotsky of it, we must uphold Trotskyism for highlighting this duality of the character of peasantry. In the same article, Trotsky states it further. While maintaining its political independence, the proletarian vanguard must be invariably ready to assure the united action with revolutionary democracy. Revolutionary democracy means peasantry. While we refuse to identify the armed peasant detachments with the Red Army, and while we have no inclination to shut our eyes to the fact that the communist banner hides the petty bourgeois content within the peasant movement, we, on the other hand, take an absolutely clear account of the tremendous revolutionary democratic significance of the peasant war. We, on the other hand, take an absolutely clear account of the tremendous revolutionary democratic significance of the peasant war. We teach the workers to comprehend this significance and we are ready to do all in our power in order to achieve the necessary military alliance with the peasant organizations. So Trotsky is saying two things. Trotsky is saying, first of all, that these are not the Red Armies but the peasant detachments. And secondly, he is saying that we must ally with these peasant detachments to carry out the revolution, to weed out the medievalism, the landlordism. We must ally with these peasant detachments, peasant armies. But he wants that they are not Red Armies. Workers must form their own Red Armies. And they must have the say. They must have their dictatorship, their dominance upon these peasant armies. Trotsky writes, for the first time in world history, the peasant was destined to find a leader in the person of the worker. In that lies the fundamental and you may say the whole difference between the Russian Revolution and all those preceding it. So emphasizing this alliance of worker and peasant, and inside that alliance the leading role and dictatorship, the central role of the working class. Trotsky is saying that the peculiarity of the Russian Revolution lies in the fact that in Russian Revolution, worker and peasant are not only allying but working class is leading that revolution and peasant is following it. To resolve the tasks of the democratic revolution, to resolve the tasks of the agrarian revolution, peasant has found its leader in the form of the Russian worker, emphasizing the role of agrarian question, agrarian revolution in the Russian Revolution as a whole. Trotsky says that without this agrarian question, without this agrarian problem, without the agrarian revolution as the main content of the Russian Revolution would not have succeeded and working class couldn't have taken power through a socialist revolution in October. Let us listen to Trotsky. If the agrarian problem as a heritage from the barbarism of the old Russian history had been solved by the bourgeoisie, if it could have been solved by them, the Russian proletariat could not possibly have come to power in 1970. In order to realize the Soviet state, there was required a drawing together and mutual penetration of two factors belonging to completely different historic species. a peasant war, that is, a movement characteristic of the dawn of bourgeois development, and a proletarian insurrection, the movement signalizing its decline, that is the essence of 1970. So he says that in 1917 these two revolutions are combined. One where peasantry has a big role to play against medievalism, and the other where peasantry would start abandoning the working class, one layer after the other, where the role of the working class would go on increasing. And here Leon Trotsky emphasizes that without the lever of the peasantry, working class could never have come to power in Russia. Russian working class was not sufficiently strong to take the power without the help of the blind lever of peasantry. In 1922, writing a preface to his article 1905, Trotsky says another very important thing. Precisely in order to guarantee its victory, the proletarian vanguard in the very early stages of its rule would have to make extremely deep inroads not only into feudal but also into bourgeois property relations. While doing so, it would enter into hostile conflict not only with all those bourgeois groups which had supported it during the first stage of the revolutionary struggle, but also with the broad masses of the peasantry with whose collaboration the proletariat had come to power. Now, Stalinists are attacking Trotsky for this. Professor Rahman has specifically cited this paragraph from Trotsky to attack Trotsky, that Trotsky is saying that peasantry would play a hostile role to the proletarian dictatorship, the proletarian regime. But isn't that exactly what had happened in Soviet Russia after revolution? Isn't it true that the sections of peasantry continued to abandon the regime led by Lenin himself, one by one? One after the other section of left SS was abandoning Bolshevik government. The layers of peasantry continued to turn their back upon the regime of Bolsheviks as the Bolshevik government continued on the road to erosion of bourgeois property. And this is characteristic feature of October Revolution. This is how Russian Revolution, our experience, our historic experience is shown to us. It is not a debate of hypothesis. Now we have the experience. We have historic experience, but Stalinists don't talk of experience. They are attacking this hypothesis of Leon Trotsky. Though this hypothesis was ratified after revolution, and Leon Trotsky is writing it after revolution, in the lifetime of Lenin. No Bolshevik leader is refuting Trotsky at the moment because the experience, the fresh experience was at hand. Peasantry was opposing. More and more sections of the peasantry were opposing the Bolshevik regime for its intrusion into its encroachment upon the bourgeois property. So this is true that the regime of The revolution, the socialist revolution, would get materialized as the dictatorship of the proletariat followed by peasantry, and this support from peasantry would get diminishing with the advance of the revolution on a socialist path. This is how Lenin and Trotsky both are conceiving the course of revolution. But Stalinists are attacking Trotsky for saying this, refuting allegations against Trotsky that Trotsky was giving a reactionary, abstract, inherent character to peasantry. It would not be out of place to mention some lines from his permanent revolution. The theory of permanent revolution, which he has concised in 14 paragraphs. Let us read through them. Let us listen to Trotsky, what he says about this alliance with peasantry. Trotsky says, the complete and genuine solution of the task of achieving democracy and national emancipation is conceivable only through the dictatorship of the proletariat as the leader of the subjugated nation above all of its peasant masses. So here, he is giving the leading role to the proletariat, but alongside, simultaneously is talking of an alliance between the working class and the peasantry. So the allegation against him that he is ignoring the peasantry or is giving a reactionary character to peasantry is absolutely incorrect. He is not giving any reactionary character to peasantry in abstraction. At the dawn of the revolution, he is giving a revolutionary character to Russian peasantry. Trotsky says, not only the agrarian but also the national question assigns to the peasantry the overwhelming majority of the population in backward countries an exceptional place in the democratic revolution. I will repeat it, it is very important. Not only the agrarian but also the national question assigns to the peasantry the overwhelming majority of the population in backward countries an exceptional place in the democratic revolution. Without an alliance of the proletariat with the peasantry, the tasks of the democratic revolution cannot be solved nor even seriously posed. It is very important, very, very important, and it abolishes all argument of Stalinists that Trotsky was not giving a role to the peasantry in the Russian Revolution. Rather, he is giving very, very important role to the peasantry. He says that no revolution can succeed without support of peasantry. He further says, the realization of the revolutionary alliance between the proletariat and the peasantry is conceivable only under the political leadership of the proletarian vanguard organized in the Communist Party. This is the writer. He is advocating, I'm repeating, Trotsky is advocating an alliance between proletariat and peasantry under the leadership of the Communist Party. For what purpose he is advocating this alliance if not the revolution? So definitely he is imparting the peasantry a revolutionary character in backward countries. In Russian Revolution specifically, is saying this, that this alliance must be there at any cost. He further says, no matter how great the revolutionary role of the peasantry may be, it nevertheless cannot be an independent role and even less a leading one. The peasant follows either the worker or the bourgeois. This means that the democratic dictatorship of the proletariat and peasantry is only conceivable as a dictatorship of the proletariat that leads the peasant masses behind it. And in this formulation, Trotsky makes everything absolutely clear, crystal clear. He says that the peasant mass would be having a very, very important role, but this role would not be, neither it would be leading, nor it would be independent. Peasant would either join the bourgeoisie or the worker. If it joins bourgeoisie, it would be stuck to reaction. Bourgeoisie would be in power. If it joins working class, there would be revolution and working class would be catapulted to power. This is the role of the peasantry that Trotsky is bringing up again and again. But this is a contingent role. In advance, he is not saying that peasantry is essentially having a revolutionary role and peasantry would go behind worker. No. This is a contingent character of peasantry. And nobody can say in advance, and no Marxist thinker has said so, that peasantry would have a revolutionary role or a reactionary role. We don't know how many layers, what sections of peasantry would be positioned to different social classes at different times of and different stages of revolution. And that is the chief problem, the core aspect of the revolution in backward countries, the countries of belated capitalism, like India, like Pakistan, like all Latin American and African, Asian countries. In these countries, the main content of the revolutionary problem would be the exact correlationship of working class with these sections of the peasant, the rural peasant. So in advance, giving an abstract character, an inherent character to peasantry as revolutionary or reactionary would be completely idiotic and non-Marxist, non-revolutionary. So it is not Trotsky who is making a mistake, it is Rahman and his comrades in the camp of Stalinists and Maoists who are following the Narodnik policy. Trotsky says, a backward colonial or semi-colonial country, the proletariat of which is insufficiently prepared to unite the peasantry and take power, is thereby incapable of bringing the democratic revolution to its conclusion. Specifically, targeting the backward countries, the countries of belated capitalist development, Trotsky says that it is the duty, he underscores that it is the duty of the proletariat in these countries to unite the peasantry. Peasantry cannot unite itself. There is the incapability of peasantry. It has no instruments to unite itself. So the task of uniting the peasantry, history is put upon the shoulders of the working class. And Trotsky says that if working class fails to unite the peasantry, it cannot make a revolution. What does it mean? It means that Leon Trotsky is giving a determinative, a conclusive weight and power to the peasantry. It is saying that without uniting with the peasantry, working class can make no revolution. And yet, Professor Rahman and his friends, they make allegation against Trotsky that Trotsky is ignoring the peasantry or is giving a reactionary character to the peasantry. Had Trotsky been giving a reactionary character to the peasantry, Trotsky must have said that working class must be ready from the very beginning to fight and counter the peasantry. He is not saying that. He is saying that working class must do everything at its disposal to unite with the peasantry and to unite the sections of the peasantry together. So that means Leon Trotsky is giving a revolutionary role to peasantry in backward countries, the countries of belated capitalist development, but a contingent role. He is not giving an inherent character to peasantry that it would, in all circumstances, it would play a revolutionary role. No, rather he is calling upon the proletariat to do everything at its disposal to unite the peasantry. More the peasantry would be united, more it would be drawn behind the proletarian revolution, the socialist revolution, more smooth and more durable would be the revolution. This is what Trotsky is saying. So the whole edifice of allegation of Professor Rahman that Trotsky is imparting a reactionary character to the peasantry is bogus and false to the core. And this is part of those infinite allegations that are being made against Leon Trotsky without any evidence, without any basis, without any foundation by Stalinists over a century. The whole purpose of these accusations is to discredit Trotsky, to create fog around his theory of permanent revolution, around the ideas Leon Trotsky had fought for, and thereby blurring the idea of revolution itself, the program of socialist revolution itself.